A couple of outlaw bikers walked into Carter's gas station looking for trouble. Instead, they found a highly decorated Air Force colonel who would expose their $100 million criminal empire. What happened next would reveal a massive drug trafficking operation, topple a corrupt small-town government, and teach the dead Vultures motorcycle gang a brutal lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous person at a gas station is the quiet grandmother filling up her tank. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have a special story for you. The evening sun cast long shadows across Carter's gas station as Helen Grant's weathered hands guided her old Ford pickup to pump number 3. Her movements were deliberate, efficient, the kind that come from decades of precision under pressure. The station's fluorescent lights flickered to life as dusk settled over Riverstone, casting a harsh glow across the cracked concrete. Evelyn Carter watched from behind the register, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight through the station's grimy windows. She'd owned this place with her husband Frank for 40 years, long enough to read trouble in the air like others read weather. Tonight, something felt different. The rumble started as a distant growl, growing louder until it filled the quiet evening. 3 motorcycles appeared on the horizon, their chrome glinting malevolently in the fading light. The dead raven's signature emblem, a black bird in flight, adorned their leather jackets, marking them as members of the gang that had been slowly tightening its grip on small towns across 3 states. Helen continued pumping gas, her eyes scanning the approaching riders with military precision. The leader, Derek Steele Morrison, dismounted first, his boots scraping against the concrete with deliberate menace. His lieutenants, known only as Viper and Wolf, flanked him, their movements suggesting military training gone wrong. Well, Steele's voice carried across the empty lot. What do we have here? Isn't it past your bedtime, Grandma? Helen didn't respond immediately. Her hands remained steady on the pump as she mentally catalogued details. Steele favored his right side, old injury, probably shoulder. Viper carried a concealed weapon, poorly hidden beneath his jacket. Wolf's aggressive stance betrayed his nervousness, a man trying too hard to be intimidating. Just getting gas, Helen replied, her voice carrying the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having stared down worse threats in worse places. Station's big enough for everyone. Steele moved closer, his scarred face twisting into what he probably thought was a charming smile. Evelyn watched from inside, her hand hovering near the phone, though they all knew the local police wouldn't arrive in time if trouble started. You know, funny thing about this station, Steele continued, running his hand along the of Helen's truck. It hasn't been paying its protection fees, makes me wonder if maybe the owners need a reminder about community safety. Helen replaced the gas pump with precise movements, her eyes never leaving Steele. 25 years of flying combat missions had taught her to recognize the moments before violence erupted. This was one of them. I'd step back if I were you, she said softly, but there was steel in her voice that made Wolf shift uncomfortably. Viper laughed, the sound sharp and artificial. Or what, Grandma? Gonna hit us with your purse? Helen turned fully toward them now, and something in her stance made Steele's smile falter slightly. There was no fear in her eyes, no uncertainty in her posture. Instead, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes only from having faced real danger and emerged victorious. Last chance, Helen stated simply. Walk away. Steele's fake smile vanished, replaced by the cold expression he used to terrorize small towns. You know what? I don't think you understand how things work around here now. This isn't your quiet little town anymore. This belongs to the dead Vultures, and it's time you learned. His words cut off as Helen moved, her actions precise and practiced. Before Steele could react, he found himself off balance, his arm locked in a hold that sent shooting pain through his shoulder. Viper reached for his concealed weapon but froze as Helen's voice cut through the evening air. That weapon you're reaching for? The one you think I don't know about? Bad idea. Your draw is slow, your concealment is sloppy, and by the time you clear leather, your boss here will have a dislocated shoulder." The gas station had gone completely silent. Even the evening crickets seemed to be holding their breath. Evelyn Carter stood transfixed behind her register, watching as a situation she'd expected to end in tragedy transformed into something entirely different. "Who are you?" Wolf's voice had lost its aggressive edge, replaced by genuine uncertainty. "Someone who's seen enough bullies for one lifetime," Helen replied, maintaining the hold on steel with practiced ease. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this station. You're going to leave Evelyn and Frank Carter alone. And you're going to tell whoever sent you that this town isn't as defenseless as you thought." She released Steele with a precise movement that left him stumbling backward. The gang leader rubbed his shoulder, his face a mixture of rage and confusion. But there was something else in his eyes now. Recognition. He'd seen that kind of movement before, that kind of confidence. This wasn't just some elderly woman they tried to intimidate. This was someone trained, someone dangerous. "This isn't over," Steele snarled, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Yes, it is," Helen replied calmly. "You just don't know it yet." As the bikers roared away into the gathering darkness, Evelyn Carter emerged from the station, her hands trembling slightly as she approached Helen. In 40 years, I've never seen anyone stand up to them like that." Helen watched the disappearing taillights, her expression thoughtful. What she had just done wasn't simply about stopping 3 bullies at a gas station. She had just challenged the authority of a criminal organization that had been slowly poisoning small towns like Riverstone, and she knew with the kind of certainty that had kept her alive through countless combat missions that this was only the beginning. "Evelyn," Helen said finally, "I think we need to talk about the dead vultures, about what's really happening in Riverstone, and about what we're going to do about it." The evening had grown dark around Carter's gas station, but for the first time in months, Evelyn felt a spark of hope. Something had changed in Riverstone tonight, something important. The dead vultures had finally picked the wrong target, and their mistake was about to cost them everything they'd built. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in Carter's gas station's back office as Evelyn pulled a worn leather notebook from beneath a false bottom in her desk drawer. Helen sat across from her, watching as the older woman's hands trembled slightly while opening the book. 40 years of operating a gas station had taught Evelyn to observe, to listen, and most importantly, to remember. "It started small," Evelyn explained, her fingers tracing down pages of careful handwriting. "New faces in town, businesses changing hands, strange deliveries at odd hours. Then the dead vultures showed up 6 months ago. At first, they just passed through, but then they started staying." Helen studied the notebook's contents, her military training kicking in as she recognized patterns in Evelyn's observations. Dates, times, license plates, suspicious vehicles, all meticulously documented with the precision of someone who understood the value of intelligence gathering. Outside, the night had settled fully over Riverstone, but the evening's confrontation had stirred up more than just the dead vulture's anger. At the police station across town, Deputy Emily Ramirez sat at her desk, staring at a stack of reports that didn't add up. Traffic violations dismissed. Complaints about the dead vultures mysteriously vanishing from the system. Investigation requests denied without explanation. M's computer screen cast a pale glow across her face as she dug deeper into the records. Her fingers paused over the keyboard when she noticed a pattern. Every time the dead vultures had been involved in an incident, Mayor Hayes' signature appeared on the dismissal orders. The sound of boots on linoleum made her quickly switch screens. Sergeant Turner rounded the corner, his face showing surprise at finding her still at work. "Little late for paperwork, isn't it, Ramirez?" Turner's voice carried forced casualness. M kept her expression neutral, remembering how Turner had changed since the dead vultures arrived. "Just finishing up the Johnson case reports, you know how the chief likes them first thing." Back at Carter's gas station, Evelyn was showing Helen more than just observations. Bank statements, property transfers, and photographs revealed a pattern that went beyond simple gang activity. Frank started noticing at first, Evelyn continued, pulling out a folder of photographs. Shipments coming through town that didn't match any local business needs, then businesses that had been here for generations suddenly selling to new owners, all represented by the same law firm in the city. Helen's eyes narrowed as she examined a particular photo showing Mayor Hayes meeting with Steele behind the old warehouse district. The corruption goes deeper than just the dead vultures, doesn't it? Evelyn nodded grimly. They're just the muscle. Someone's using them to take over Riverstone piece by piece. But after tonight, she looked at Helen with hope in her eyes. You're not just any retired Air Force officer, are you? Before Helen could respond, her phone vibrated. The message was from a number she hadn't used in years. Spotted dead vultures movement. Steele made calls after gas station incident. Something big in motion. At the dead vultures compound on the outskirts of town, Steele paced in his office, his shoulders still aching from Helen's hold. The wall behind his desk was covered in maps showing territory markers and business locations throughout Riverstone and neighboring towns. Viper watched from the doorway as Steele made another call. The old woman's got training, boss. Military, maybe special forces. Steele slammed the phone down, his face twisted with rage. I want everything on her. Every detail, every connection, every weakness. Nobody makes us look weak in our own territory. Wolf entered, holding a tablet. Already on it. Helen Grant, retired Air Force colonel. 25 years of service, most of it classified. Moved to Riverstone 8 months ago to be closer to her sister's family. Steele's expression changed from anger to calculating interest. Get me Hayes. If she's going to be a problem, we need to handle this through official channels first. Keep it quiet. Keep it clean. Across town at the Riverstone Police Department, Ramirez was making copies of key documents when she heard voices from the chief's office. She recognized Mayor Hayes' distinctive tone, followed by Steele's lower rumble. This Grant woman could complicate things, Hayes was saying. The shipment next week will proceed as planned, Steele interrupted. We've invested too much to let one retired officer interfere. Besides, we have the whole department under control, don't we, Chief? M's hand tightened on the documents she was holding. 8 months on the force, and she'd watched as corruption slowly infected every aspect of law enforcement in Riverstone. But tonight was different. Something had shifted after the incident at Carter's gas station. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Back in Evelyn's office, Helen finished reviewing the evidence. We need to be careful with this, Evelyn. The dead vultures are just part of the problem. If Hayes and the police department are involved. Evelyn's expression hardened with determination. Frank and I have lived here our whole lives. We've watched them slowly destroy everything we care about. After what you did tonight, people will talk. They'll remember what it was like to stand up to bullies. Helen's phone vibrated again. Another message. Hayes called emergency meeting with dead vultures leadership. Surveillance in place. She looked at Evelyn. Decision made. I need to make some calls. There are people who need to know what's happening here. People who can help. As Helen left the gas station, she noticed a police cruiser parked across the street, its occupant watching too intently to be on routine patrol. She memorized the plate number automatically. Decades of training kicking in. Ramirez, leaving the police station after her shift, watched the same cruiser pass by. Her decisions tonight, copying those documents, investigating the connections between Hayes and the dead vultures, had put her on a path that would change everything. In the dead vultures compound, Steele stared at Helen's military service photo on his computer screen. You picked the wrong town to play heroine, Colonel, he muttered, reaching for his phone to make one more call. The night settled deeper over Riverstone, but beneath the quiet surface, forces were moving. Helen Grant's stand at Carter's gas station had started something, disrupted careful plans years in the making. In the coming days, this small town would become a battlefield where corruption faced justice and where one woman's courage would inspire others to stand against the darkness that had been slowly consuming their home. Evelyn Carter closed her notebook and returned it to its hiding place, knowing that tomorrow would bring consequences. But for the first time in months, those consequences didn't feel like defeat. They felt like the beginning of something else entirely, the start of Riverstone's resistance against the forces that had tried to claim it as their own. Dawn broke over Riverstone with an uneasy quiet. Helen Grant sat at her kitchen table, cleaning her old service pistol with practiced precision while reviewing Evelyn's notes. The morning paper lay beside her, its headline announcing Mayor Hayes's Community Safety Initiative, a thinly veiled excuse to increase police presence around town. Her phone buzzed with a message from her old Air Force squadron mate, Colonel James Iron Parker. "Check those names you sent. Dead vultures have connections going up the state level. Be careful, Storm." The sound of motorcycles approached her house, 3 bikes moving slowly. Helen continued cleaning her weapon, unrushed. The dead vultures had spent the night watching her house, trying to establish dominance through intimidation. Amateur tactics. A rock crashed through her front window, shattering the morning silence. Helen didn't flinch, didn't even look up. She'd been expecting this, had planned for it. The cameras she'd installed last night were already recording, documenting everything. Outside, Viper's voice carried clearly. "That's just a warning, Colonel. Next time." The sprinkler system suddenly activated, spraying the bikers with unexpected force. Helen had modified the pressure the night before, anticipating this visit. The bikes skidded on the suddenly wet pavement, their riders struggling to maintain control. From across the street, M. Ramirez watched through binoculars from her parked car, documenting everything. She'd followed the dead vultures after overhearing their plans at the station. Now she had proof of their intimidation tactics. Helen's phone buzzed again, Evelyn this time. "They're at the station, Steele and Hayes both. Something about a shipment schedule." At Carter's gas station, Evelyn pretended to check inventory while eavesdropping on the conversation in her office. Steele's voice carried an edge of barely controlled rage. "The schedule's already set," Steele was saying. "We've got buyers expecting delivery next week. This Grant woman is a complication we don't need." Hayes' response was harder to hear, but his tone suggested growing anxiety. "The council meeting's tomorrow. I can push through the new zoning ordinances, give you full access to the warehouse district." M. Ramirez chose that moment to pull into the gas station, making a show of checking her patrol car's tire pressure. Her presence sent Hayes hurrying out the back door while Steele glared through the window. Inside her house, Helen was making calls of her own. Her laptop displayed satellite images of Riverstone's warehouse district, provided by another old contact. 25 years in the Air Force had built a network of people who owed her favors. A knock at her door, distinctive, rhythmic. The pattern sheet arranged with M earlier through encrypted text messages. Helen opened the door to find the young deputy standing there, holding a thick folder. "Everything I could find," M said without preamble. "Financial records, patrol schedules, evidence that disappeared from lockup. Hayes has been working with the dead vultures for months, maybe longer." Helen led her to the kitchen table, where satellite photos and Evelyn's notes were spread out. "Tell me about the warehouse district." M's eyes widened as she saw the detailed intelligence. "How did you?" "Let's just say I still have friends in high places," Helen replied, spreading out new photos. "What we need now is to understand their operation. Patterns, schedules, vulnerabilities." At the dead vultures compound, Steele was losing patience. 3 of his best men had failed to intimidate one retired officer. His phone wouldn't stop ringing with demands from upstate, people wanting assurances that the distribution network wouldn't be compromised. "I want her watched," he ordered Viper. "Every movement, every contact. Find out who she's talking to." But Helen was already ahead of them. Years of combat operations had taught her to think 3 moves ahead. While the dead vultures watched her house, her real work was happening elsewhere. Evelyn's notebook had revealed more than just local corruption. Shipment schedules, business transfers, bank records, all pointing to a massive operation using Riverstone as a distribution hub. The dead vultures were just the visible muscle. The real power lay higher up. M studied the evidence spread across Helen's table. The chief's been reassigning patrols away from the warehouse district every Tuesday night. That's when the trucks come in. Helen nodded, adding this to her growing intelligence picture. Hayes pushes through building permits, looks the other way on inspections. The dead vultures provide muscle and local control, but they're all working for someone bigger. Her phone buzzed again. Iron Parker. State police records show similar patterns in 3 other towns. Same setup, different gangs. This goes deep, Storm. A car pulled up outside. Evelyn's old station wagon. Helen checked the security camera feed before opening the door. Evelyn hurried in, clutching her notebook and a USB drive. Frank followed Hayes after he left the station, Evelyn reported. He went straight to the bank, withdrew everything from 2 accounts. He's running scared. Helen's tactical mind processed this new information. Hayes preparing to run meant the operation was larger than even she'd suspected. The dead vultures might control Riverstone, but someone controlled them. M's police radio crackled, a call about suspicious activity at the warehouse district. Standard procedure would send units to investigate, but the chief's voice came through, redirecting LL patrols to a non-existent disturbance across town. They're moving something big, M realized. Tonight. They're not waiting for next week. Helen was already moving, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. Good. Let them think we don't know. Evelyn, get that evidence somewhere safe. M, we need eyes on the warehouse district, but don't get too close. Let them think their intimidation worked. As sunset approached, Helen made one final call to a number she'd hoped never to use again. When the voice answered, she spoke clearly. Remember that favor you owe me? It's time. Riverstone needs to be cleaned up. The voice paused before responding. The team can be there in 4 hours, just like old-time Storm. Helen watched through her window as more dead vultures' bikes rolled past, their riders trying to look intimidating. They had no idea they were being watched, documented, analyzed. Their attempts at intimidation had only confirmed what she'd suspected. They were afraid. No, she replied into the phone. This time we're not just completing a mission. This time we're saving a town. The pieces were falling into place. Hayes was preparing to run. The dead vultures were accelerating their timeline, and Helen Grant, who'd spent her career flying into danger to save others, was preparing for one more mission. But this time she wasn't alone. She had Evelyn's evidence, M's inside knowledge, and a lifetime of combat experience. The dead vultures thought they were watching her, but she was the one setting the trap. Night fell over Riverstone as Helen checked her security feeds one last time. Tomorrow would change everything. The dead vultures were about to learn why picking a fight with a retired Air Force colonel had been their biggest mistake. Midnight cast deep shadows across Riverstone's warehouse district as Helen Grant observed the increased activity through her night vision binoculars. 3 trucks had arrived in the past hour, their movements hurried, sloppy. The dead vulture security was showing signs of strain, their usual disciplined patrols replaced by nervous energy. From her vantage point on the old water tower, Helen keyed her radio. All units report status. The responses came in quick succession. Professionals who understood the importance of brevity. Echo 1, North Perimeter secure. Colonel Parker's voice was steady, his team of former Air Force pararescue operators already in position. Echo 2, loading dock covered. Another veteran from Helen's past missions, positioned with his team to intercept any escape attempts. M. Ramirez's voice came next, tense but controlled. 3 units of clean officers standing by, 5 minutes out. Chief's been detained by state police for questioning. The dead Vultures had no idea their operation was already compromised. Evelyn's evidence, combined with M's police reports, had given state authorities enough cause to move on the corrupt police chief. But the real target was still to come. Helen's phone vibrated. A text from Evelyn. Hayes just emptied the safe deposit box, headed your way with briefcase. Inside the main warehouse, Steele was shouting orders as his men rushed to load crates onto the trucks. The scheduled disruption had created chaos, exactly as Helen had predicted. Fear made people sloppy. Viper, get those trucks ready to move. Steele commanded, his voice carrying across the warehouse floor. Wolf, where's Hayes? He was supposed to be here with the documents. A motorcycle roared up to the warehouse, one of their scouts. Boss, we got problems. State police just picked up the chief. And Hayes? Hayes is running. Steele's face contorted with rage. Everything was unraveling. The operation they'd spent months building was falling apart because of one retired officer who refused to be intimidated. Helen watched Hayes' car approach the warehouse district, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The mayor was driving erratically, desperate to reach the dead Vultures before his world completely collapsed. All units hold position, Helen ordered. Let him enter the kill zone. Hayes barely slowed as he approached the warehouse gates, his BMW scattering gravel. Behind him, unmarked vehicles moved into blocking positions, cutting off his escape routes. Inside the warehouse, Steele's phone rang. The caller ID made his face pale. Sir, we have a situation. The voice on the other end cut him off. Fix it. Now. Or you'll be replaced. Permanently. Helen's radio crackled. Echo 1, multiple hostiles approaching from the north. Professional operators, not gang members. The game was changing. The dead Vultures weren't just sending bikers anymore. Someone higher up was sending in real muscle. Execute Plan Charlie, Helen ordered. Echo teams, prepare for professional opposition. These aren't amateur gang members anymore. Hayes' car skidded to a stop outside the warehouse. He grabbed his briefcase and ran for the entrance, his polished shoes slipping on the gravel. Steele met him at the door, grabbing his arm roughly. Where's the paperwork? Steele demanded. Right here, everything you need. Hayes stammered, holding up the briefcase. But we need to move. Now. Grant, she's not just some retired officer. She's got connections. A shot rang out, precise and controlled. The briefcase exploded in Hayes' hands, scattering papers across the ground. The mayor fell back with a cry of terror as Steele dragged him inside. Echo 2, target package secured. A calm voice reported over Helen's radio. Documents are exposed. Move now. Helen gave the order. All units, execute. The night erupted into controlled chaos. M's clean officers moved in from the south while Echo teams approached from the north and east. The dead Vulture security teams found themselves caught in a perfectly orchestrated crossfire. Inside the warehouse, Steele realized they were surrounded. Get those trucks moving, he shouted, pushing Hayes toward an office. Wolf, take the east exit. Viper, get our backup online. But Helen had anticipated every move. Each exit was covered, each escape route blocked. 25 years of military operations had taught her how to plan for every contingency. Hayes broke away from Steele, running blindly toward what he thought was an escape route. He found himself face to face with Helen Grant, her weapon trained steadily on his chest. "Going somewhere, Mr. Mayor?" Steele raised his weapon, but multiple red dots appeared on his chest, laser sights from Echo Team's positions. "Stand down," Helen commanded. "It's over." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Steele snarled. "We're just the surface, the real power is about to learn that they picked the wrong town," Helen finished. The operation concluded with precision. M's clean officers secured the scene while Echo Teams rounded up the remaining dead vultures and their professional backup. Hayes and Steele were taken into custody, their attempted escape documented and witnessed. Helen surveyed the captured trucks, their contents exactly what Evelyn's intelligence had suggested. Drugs, weapons, and documented evidence of a criminal network that reached far beyond Riverstone. Her phone buzzed one final time that night, a message from her military contact. "Careful Storm, surveillance suggests cartel involvement, this goes higher than we thought." Helen watched as M coordinated with state police, the young deputy already showing signs of the leader she would become. Evelyn's evidence was being catalogued by federal agents, her years of careful observation finally serving justice. The night's operation had succeeded, but Helen knew this was just the beginning. They'd broken the dead vultures' hold on Riverstone, exposed Hayes' corruption, and disrupted a major criminal operation. But somewhere in the darkness, the real powers behind this operation were already planning their response. Dawn approached as Helen made one final call. "Package secured, but we're going to need a bigger team. They'll try to retaliate." The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Already assembled, Colonel, just give us a time and place." Helen looked out over Riverstone as the first light began to break. The town had taken its first step toward freedom, but the real battle was just beginning. The dead vultures were just enforcers. Now it was time to take on the real enemy. Morning light revealed the full scope of the previous night's operation. The warehouse district had become a hive of activity as state police and federal agents processed evidence from the raid. M. Ramirez stood at the center of it all, coordinating with various agencies while honest officers from her department secured the perimeter. Helen Grant watched from the warehouse office, her tactical mind already analyzing potential vulnerabilities. The dead vultures operation had been bigger than anyone suspected. The seized trucks contained not just drugs and weapons, but detailed ledgers pointing to operations in other towns. Evelyn Carter arrived with coffee in her notebook, moving through the police barrier with the confidence of someone who'd earned their place at the table. Her documentation had proven invaluable, and now federal agents were treating her years of careful observation as gospel. Third truck had false papers, Evelyn reported, setting coffee beside Helen. All tied to a shipping company out of Mexico, same one that tried to buy the old Miller property last year. Helen's phone buzzed, Colonel Parker's preliminary report. Captured phones showed direct links to Sonora cartel. Dead vultures were just local muscle, real players still in play. The sound of helicopters drew their attention skyward. News crews were arriving, drawn by rumors of the major bust. M. directed officers to maintain the perimeter while Helen retreated further into the warehouse. Her face couldn't be connected to this yet, not while bigger threats remained. Inside the Riverstone Police Department, temporary Chief Williams from the state police was addressing the remaining officers. The corruption purge had left them short-staffed, but M. had identified officers they could trust. Deputy Ramirez will be acting as liaison between local and state authorities, Williams announced. Any operations in Riverstone go through her first. The handful of honest officers nodded in approval. They'd watched M stand against corruption while others looked away. She'd earned their respect. Helen's secure phone line rang, a contact from her Air Force days now working federal intelligence. "Storm, got something you need to see. Sending files now. Cartel's not happy, they're calling in specialists." At the Federal Holding Center, Steele was discovering his own insignificance. His attempts to negotiate a deal were met with silence, as agents revealed how expendable he'd been to the larger organization. "The phones we seized," M. reported later in Helen's kitchen, spreading photos across the table. "They show regular calls to a number in someone called El Aguila, the Eagle." Evelyn's eyes widened at the name. "That shipping company that's been buying properties, Eagle Logistics International." Helen studied the photos while her military team secured the house perimeter. The cartel had been smart, using legitimate businesses as cover. But Evelyn's methodical record-keeping had exposed the pattern. "They're not going to let this go," Colonel Parker warned, joining them at the table. Riverstone was meant to be their new distribution hub. "We didn't just disrupt local operations, we compromised their entire northern network." M's police radio crackled with reports of suspicious vehicles at the town limits. Black SUVs with tinted windows, professional drivers, showing none of the dead Vultures' amateur aggression. "They're already here," Helen observed, recognizing the tactics. "Surveillance teams, professional operators, they're assessing our defenses." Evelyn's phone chimed with messages from her network of small business owners. "My people are seeing them too. Gas stations, diners, shops, they're mapping the town." Helen moved to her planning board, where satellite images and tactical overlays showed Riverstone's layout. "M, coordinate with state police, we need checkpoints here, here, and here." "Evelyn, get word to your network, any suspicious activity gets reported directly to M." Colonel Parker studied the map. "My team can cover key positions, but we're light on numbers, if they bring in serious muscle." "They will," Helen interrupted, "but they'll want to keep this quiet. No cartel wants federal attention this far north, they'll try to make it look local. Business disputes, accidents, property crimes." M received an urgent text from one of her officers. Security footage from the impound lot, someone tried to access the seized trucks. The attempt had been professional, no signs of forced entry, just a sophisticated electronic bypass that failed against M's upgraded security measures. Helen's secure line rang again. "Storm, facial recognition got a hit. Carlos Ramirez, El Aguila's top enforcer, landed at a private airstrip 2 hours ago. 4-man team, heavy credentials." Evelyn's network continued reporting throughout the day. Black SUVs appearing and disappearing, men in expensive suits asking casual questions about property values, mysterious technical issues with security systems at key businesses. "They're preparing," Helen explained to her assembled team that evening. "Professional cartel operators work differently than street gangs. They'll establish total surveillance, identify weaknesses, and plan multiple approaches." M added her own intelligence. State police intercepted 3 former dead Vultures trying to leave town. "They're scared, saying something big is coming." Helen had seen this pattern before, in other operations against sophisticated enemies. "They'll try to isolate us first, cut communications, turn the community against us, make us look like the aggressors." As if confirming her assessment, the local newspaper's evening edition carried a story questioning the legitimacy of the warehouse raid. The publisher had received documents suggesting police misconduct. "Already starting," Evelyn observed, adding the article to her notebook, trying to control the narrative. Helen's team worked late into the night, establishing defensive positions and communication protocols. They'd won the first battle against local criminals, but now they face professional cartel operators with virtually unlimited resources. "We need to assume they have surveillance on everything," Helen instructed. "No direct communications, no obvious movements. Evelyn's network becomes our eyes and ears. M's officers provide visible security while we operate in the shadows." Her phone lit up with a final intelligence update. Eagle Logistics International just purchased 3 properties surrounding Riverstone. Shell companies, all cash deals. The cartel was setting up for siege and infiltration, but they'd made one critical mistake. They thought they were dealing with a small town that had gotten lucky against a local gang. They had no idea they were facing a coordinated team led by someone who'd spent her career fighting against superior forces. As night fell over Riverstone, Helen made preparations for the real battle ahead. The dead Vultures had been amateurs playing at being criminals. Now they would face true professionals and discover why challenging Helen Grant's town had been their greatest mistake. The morning brought subtle changes to Riverstone that only trained eyes would notice. Security cameras at key intersections had been professionally disabled overnight. Internet service was spotty in strategic locations. 3 new businesses had opened with suspiciously quick permit approvals. Helen Grant observed these changes from Carter's gas station, where Evelyn's morning coffee crowd had become an intelligence-gathering operation. Local contractors reported mysterious job offers. Shop owners mentioned polite but persistent buyers interested in their properties. "They're not just watching anymore," Colonel Parker reported, joining Helen at her usual table. "My team counted 6 professional surveillance units last night. They're mapping everything: patrol routes, response times, civilian patterns." Ramirez arrived next, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. "2 of our checkpoint officers were approached last night, offered significant retirement packages to relocate. These aren't dead Vultures tactics anymore." Helen's military training recognized the sophistication of the cartel's approach. They weren't using threats or violence yet. They were trying to buy the town piece by piece, identifying who could be corrupted and who needed to be removed. Evelyn's network continued reporting throughout the morning. A real estate office opened on Main Street, staffed by professionals with perfect credentials and unlimited cash offers. A new security company began soliciting local businesses, offering free upgrades to their systems. "They're establishing infrastructure," Helen explained to her core team, creating legitimate cover for their surveillance. "Every security camera they install, every property they buy gives them another piece of the puzzle." Her secure phone buzzed, intelligence from federal sources. Carlos Ramirez confirmed meeting with former dead Vultures, recruiting local muscle for community improvement project. The cartel's strategy was becoming clear. Instead of the dead Vultures' brutal tactics, they were using sophistication and legitimacy. Every move had multiple purposes, making it difficult for law enforcement to find clear violations. M's afternoon briefing revealed more pressure points, building inspectors suddenly finding code violations in businesses that refused to sell. Insurance rates mysteriously increasing for properties in key locations. Traffic stops targeting delivery vehicles for loyal businesses. "They're squeezing the town financially," Evelyn observed, adding notes to her ever-growing documentation, making it expensive to resist and profitable to cooperate. Helen watched through her tactical scope as another black SUV made its 3rd pass of the day. The driver's movements were professional, consistent speed, precise turns, no wasted motion. These weren't gang members playing at being tough. These were trained operators executing a coordinated plan. Colonel Parker's team reported increased electronic surveillance attempts. "They've got tech teams trying to access police communications, traffic systems, even power grid controls." The pressure escalated throughout the day. A health inspector shut down 3 restaurants that had supported the police during the dead Vultures raid. A construction project began disrupting traffic to loyal businesses. Banking issues suddenly plagued families of officers who had participated in the warehouse operation. Helen's secure line rang. Her federal contact's voice was tense. "Elagula's people are moving serious resources your way. They're treating Riverstone like a major operation now." The first direct contact came at sunset. A well-dressed man entered Carter's gas station, his manner perfectly cordial. He placed a business card on Evelyn's counter, Eagle Logistics International. "Ms. Carter," his smile never reached his eyes. "My employer would like to discuss a very generous offer for your property. He believes it would be mutually beneficial to reach an agreement quickly." Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the card, but her voice was steady. "Please tell your employer that Carter's isn't for sale at any price. The man's smile didn't waver. "Everything has a price, Ms. Carter. The question is whether that price is paid in dollars or other currencies." Helen watched the exchange through the security feed from her position across the street. The threat was perfectly delivered. PR. Professional, deniable, and crystal clear. Ms. Officers reported similar visits throughout town. Legitimate businesses making legitimate offers, but always with that underlying current of tension. The cartel was establishing its presence while maintaining perfect legal deniability. "They're good," Colonel Parker admitted during the evening briefing. "Every move serves multiple purposes. Every pressure point is technically legal. They're building a noose around the town that most people won't even see until it's too late." Helen studied the pattern map they'd created. Red pins showing cartel property acquisitions, blue pins marking compromised security systems, yellow pins indicating businesses under pressure. The strategic pattern was impressive. "They think they're being subtle," Helen observed, "but they're showing us exactly what they value. Every location they pressure is a point they need. Every person they approach is someone they think is crucial." Her phone lit up with surveillance photos from her team. Cartel operators meeting with former dead vultures. Technical teams installing equipment on buildings they'd purchased. Surveillance units establishing observation posts throughout town. "They're preparing for something bigger," M concluded, reviewing police reports. "All this infrastructure, all this preparation, they're building up to a major operation." The next morning brought the first real demonstration of cartel power. Every business that had refused to sell discovered their deliveries couldn't make it through suddenly intensive inspections. Credit card systems mysteriously failed. Building permits were revoked for violations that hadn't existed the day before, but Riverstone was changing too. Evelyn's network had grown, with citizens reporting suspicious activities through carefully established channels. M's officers had adapted to the cartel's professional tactics, documenting everything while maintaining perfect procedural compliance. Helen's military team continued their shadow operations, gathering intelligence while remaining invisible to cartel surveillance. They weren't fighting amateur gang members anymore. They were engaged in a sophisticated battle of surveillance and counter-surveillance with professional operators. As pressure mounted, Helen received one final message that day. "El Aguila arriving personally next week. This isn't about a distribution hub anymore. It's about making an example." The cartel had changed the game, bringing sophistication and resources that dwarfed anything the dead vultures had possessed. But they had made one crucial mistake. They still thought they were fighting a small town that had gotten lucky against a local gang. They were about to learn that Riverstone had its own professional operators, its own sophisticated network, and a leader who had spent her career outthinking and outfighting superior forces. The cartel's first coordinated strike began at dawn. Power outages hit strategic sections of Riverstone, communications went dark in key areas, and a fleet of unmarked vehicles moved into position around crucial infrastructure. Carlos Ramirez directed operations from a newly purchased office building, coordinating teams of professional operators with military precision. Helen Grant watched it unfold from her command center in Evelyn's basement, where surveillance feeds showed the cartel's operation taking shape. Unlike the Dead Raven's brutal but simple tactics, this was a sophisticated attempt to paralyze the town's resistance through perfectly legal means. "They're isolating target zones," Colonel Parker observed, marking affected areas on their tactical map. "Power out in the police district, communications down around key businesses, traffic control systems compromised in escape corridors." Ramirez's voice crackled over their secure radio. "For inspection teams just hit our supporting businesses simultaneously. Health department, building code, fire safety, and environmental, all with perfect paperwork." Evelyn's network was already responding. Shop owners who had refused to sell found themselves facing surprise audits and permit reviews. Delivery trucks were detained for extensive safety inspections. Even the local bank began calling in loans on targeted properties. Legal pressure points, Helen noted, recognizing the strategy. They're trying to strangle resistance through legitimate channels while maintaining perfect deniability. Her secure phone buzzed with intelligence from federal sources. El Aguila personally ordered this operation. He wants Riverstone's resistance broken before his arrival next week. But Helen had anticipated this approach. While the cartel focused on official pressure, her team was executing their own counter-operation. M's trusted officers were documenting every inspection, every delay, every coincidental problem, building a pattern that even the cartel's lawyers couldn't explain away. Evelyn's morning coffee crowd had become an intelligence network. Every cartel surveillance team found themselves being watched by ordinary citizens reporting through secure channels. Every pressure attempt was met with community support that frustrated the cartel's isolation strategy. "They're hitting Carter's gas station," Evelyn reported, watching through her security feeds. 3 inspection teams and a tax auditor. Helen's response was immediate. Execute Phase 2. Across town, Colonel Parker's team activated their countermeasures. Suddenly, cartel-owned properties faced their own mysterious issues. Their newly installed security systems experienced technical difficulties. Their perfectly crafted paperwork encountered unexpected bureaucratic delays. Carlos Ramirez discovered his operation headquarters had lost power due to an equipment malfunction. His surveillance teams reported local citizens photographing their vehicles and activities. Every attempt to isolate targets was met with community support that appeared completely spontaneous. "They're getting frustrated," M reported from her position near the police station, starting to make mistakes. 2 of their inspection teams just violated procedure trying to force a shutdown. Helen recognized the shift in momentum. The cartel's sophisticated operation was being disrupted by seemingly uncoordinated resistance. Every move they made exposed them to counter moves they couldn't fight without revealing their true nature. Evelyn's phone network buzzed constantly with updates. Cartel surveillance teams found their vehicles blocked by accidentally parked cars. Their inspection teams faced business owners who knew their rights and had lawyers on speed dial. Their attempt to control information met a community that had developed its own communication networks. "This isn't what they expected," Colonel Parker noted, watching the cartel's operation falter. "They're used to towns surrendering to pressure or fighting back illegally. They don't know how to handle organized legal resistance." Helen's federal contact called with updated intelligence. "El Aguila's furious. He's ordered Ramirez to escalate operations. Be careful. They're going to abandon subtle approaches soon." The shift became evident as afternoon approached. Cartel teams began employing more aggressive tactics. Health inspectors attempted to force entry without warrants. Traffic stops turned into vehicle searches. Building inspectors started making direct threats. But this was exactly what Helen had planned for. M's officers were in position to document every violation. Evelyn's network captured every illegal action on video. Colonel Parker's team gathered evidence of coordination that proved these weren't isolated incidents. "They're exposed now," Helen explained to her team. "Every attempt to escalate moves them further from legitimate business operations and closer to provable criminal activity." Carlos Ramirez realized the trap too late. His team's increasing aggression had generated enough evidence to justify state police intervention. Their sophisticated pressure campaign had been turned against them, creating a documented pattern of organized criminal activity. "State police just obtained emergency warrants," M reported with satisfaction. "They're moving on owned properties now, all completely legal, all based on evidence we've gathered." Helen watched through her tactical feeds as the cartel's operation collapsed. Their careful infiltration had been exposed. Their legitimate businesses were now under official investigation. Their professional operators were being identified and documented. Her secure line rang one final time that day. A message from El Aguila himself, delivered through intermediaries. You're fighting a war you can't win, Colonel. Next week, I'll show you the difference between resisting local gangs and challenging real power. But the cartel leader had revealed something crucial in his threat. His organization's first major operation against Riverstone had failed, forcing him to take personal control. They were no longer dealing with a professional enforcer. They had drawn out the man behind the curtain. As night fell, Helen gathered her team to prepare for the coming escalation. The cartel would abandon sophisticated pressure for more direct approaches now. El Aguila would bring resources that dwarfed anything they'd faced so far. But Riverstone had changed. The town had found its strength, developed its defenses, and learned to fight back against professional operators. They had survived the Dead Raven's brutal tactics and overcome the cartel's sophisticated pressure. They still think this is about controlling a town, Helen told her assembled team. They don't understand that they're not fighting a place. They're fighting a community. And next week, they'll learn why that's a battle they can't win. 3 days before El Aguila's scheduled arrival, the cartel abandoned all pretense of legitimate business operations. A fire mysteriously broke out at Thompson's Hardware, one of the first businesses to support Helen's resistance. Professional arsonists had ensured the blaze would destroy inventory and insurance records while leaving no evidence of foul play. Helen stood in the rain, watching firefighters battle the flames while calculating the cartel's shift in strategy. The message was clear. They were done playing by the rules. Her secure phone hadn't stopped buzzing with updates from her federal contact, each more concerning than the last. 4 professional teams entered town limits last night. Colonel Parker reported joining her at the scene. These aren't corporate operators anymore. Military background, wet work specialists. They're setting up for something big. M. Ramirez arrived with a squad of state police. Her expression grim. 2 of my officers were run off the road this morning. Professional hit and run. No witnesses, no evidence. They're targeting our response capabilities now. Evelyn's network had detected the change to her morning report detailed multiple aggressive moves. Delivery drivers threatened. Family members followed suspicious accidents plaguing resistant business owners. The cartel was sending a clear message. Cooperation was no longer optional. They're clearing the board, Helen explained during an emergency meeting in Evelyn's reinforced basement. El Aguila doesn't just want control anymore. He wants to make an example of Riverstone. Her tactical display showed red pins spreading across town. Cartel assets moving into position. Black SUVs with heavily tinted windows patrolled the streets openly. Now their occupants carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional killers. Colonel Parker's team reported increased surveillance countermeasures. They've got electronic warfare units scanning for our communications. Technical teams probing our security. They're preparing for a major operation. M's afternoon briefing revealed the scope of the threat. State police intercepted 2 vehicles full of military-grade weapons, perfect paperwork, high-end forgeries. They're bringing in serious firepower. Evelyn's hands shook as she added notes to her ever-growing documentation. Frank followed one of their teams. They're setting up observation posts around town, professional equipment, military-grade optics. Helen studied the pattern emerging on their tactical maps. The cartel was establishing a grid system, dividing Riverstone into manageable sectors for a coordinated operation. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. They were preparing for war. Her federal contact's voice was urgent in the encrypted call. El Aguila's bringing his entire security detail. Personal protection team, tactical units, cleanup crews. He's never committed this level of resources to a single operation. The first casualty came that evening. A local mechanic who'd helped document cartel movements was found in his garage, victim of an apparent accident with a vehicle lift. The message was professional, deniable, and chilling. Anyone who resisted would face consequences. Helen's response was immediate. Her military team evacuated key witnesses to safe houses. M's officers implemented emergency protocols, moving in pairs with state police backup. Evelyn's network shifted to secure communications, using dead drops and coded messages. They think fear will make us break, Helen told her assembled team. But they don't understand what they're really fighting. Every act of intimidation, every threat, every attack. It just shows people what they're really facing. The town's response proved her right. Instead of cowering, Riverstone's citizens adapted. Businesses installed security systems. Neighbors watched out for each other. Every cartel move was observed, documented, and reported through Evelyn's expanding network. Colonel Parker's team detected the first advance units probing town defenses. Professional operators testing response times and security measures. This is full military-style reconnaissance. M's radio crackled with updates throughout the night. Suspicious vehicles checking police patrol routes. Technical teams attempting to access emergency response systems. Cartel soldiers establishing sniper positions in recently purchased buildings. Helen's secure line rang with intelligence from federal sources. El Aguila's cleanup crews are already in position. He's expecting resistance to be completely broken within 48 hours of his arrival. But Riverstone had changed since the days of the dead Vultures. The town had learned to fight sophisticated enemies, to resist professional pressure, to stand together against organized threats. Every cartel escalation was met with calculated response. Every act of intimidation strengthened community resolve. They still don't understand, Helen explained during the late-night strategy session. They think they're fighting individuals who can be intimidated or eliminated. They don't realize they're fighting an entire community that's learned to defend itself. Her phone lit up with surveillance photos from her team. Cartel tactical units moving into position. Weapons being distributed to professional operators. Command and control systems being established in seemingly innocent locations. 2 days, Colonel Parker noted, checking his tactical watch. They'll have everything in place before El Aguila arrives. This will be the biggest operation we've faced. Helen studied the evolving situation maps. The cartel had virtually unlimited resources, professional operators, and a leader determined to make an example of Riverstone. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They think this is about power, she told her team. About showing a small town what happens when it resists. But they're about to learn something that the dead Vultures learned too late. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is threatening people who've decided they're done being afraid. As midnight approached, Helen made final preparations for the coming confrontation. El Aguila was bringing an army of professional killers to crush a small town's resistance. He would find instead a community prepared for war, led by someone who had spent her career fighting superior forces. The cartel was about to learn why threatening Helen Grant's town had been their greatest mistake. 24 hours before El Aguila's arrival, the cartel launched their first major offensive against Riverstone. Multiple explosions rocked the town's power substations, plunging strategic sectors into darkness. Professional strike teams hit police checkpoints simultaneously, forcing M's officers into defensive positions. Communications went dark across key areas as cartel technical teams deployed sophisticated jamming equipment. Helen Grant stood in Evelyn's reinforced basement, watching multiple tactical displays as the carefully orchestrated attack unfolded. The cartel's operations showed perfect coordination. Each strike designed to isolate and neutralize specific resistance points before the main force arrived. 4 teams hit the north checkpoint. M reported through their backup radio system. Professional operators, military tactics, they're pushing us back toward the center of town. Colonel Parker's voice crackled through their secure channel. Sniper teams active on the water tower and grain elevator. They're setting up interlocking fields of fire, trying to control movement through town. Evelyn's network provided crucial intelligence as the attack developed. Her morning coffee regulars reported cartel kill teams moving through residential areas, methodically eliminating security cameras and communication equipment. Business owners documented tactical units establishing command posts in recently purchased buildings. They're following standard military doctrine, Helen observed, recognizing the pattern. Isolate, control, then neutralize. But they don't realize they're fighting a battle that was already won. Her secure phone buzzed with updates from federal sources. Alagila's advance team confirmed departure, full security detail, multiple vehicle convoy. They're expecting to enter a pacified town. The cartel's operation continued with mechanical precision. Teams of professional operators systematically targeted known resistance points. M's police station came under sustained attack from multiple directions. Colonel Parker's defensive positions faced coordinated assaults from well-trained forces. But Helen had anticipated this approach. While the cartel focused on obvious targets, her real strategy was already in motion. Evelyn's network wasn't just gathering intelligence. They were activating pre-positioned resources and implementing long-planned responses. They think they're fighting a conventional battle, Helen explained to her team. Looking for military targets, police resistance, organized opposition. They don't understand that we've already changed the nature of the conflict. The first sign of this change came when cartel tactical teams found their carefully planned routes blocked by seemingly random obstacles. Construction equipment, delivery trucks, and civilian vehicles created choke points that forced operators into pre-sighted areas. M's voice carried satisfaction. State police SWAT teams moving in from staged positions. Cartel units are boxed in exactly where we wanted them. Colonel Parker's team reported similar successes. Enemy sniper teams are fixed in position. They're watching the wrong approaches, missing our counter-sniper deployments. The cartel's sophisticated communication jamming met a town that had already established alternative networks. Evelyn's morning coffee crowd passed crucial intelligence through predetermined signals. Business owners coordinated resistance through methods that required no electronics. They're getting frustrated, Evelyn reported, monitoring through her remaining cameras. Starting to abandon protocol, making aggressive moves without proper reconnaissance. Helen's federal contact called with urgent intelligence. El Aguila's convoy is accelerating their timeline. They're reading the situation wrong, thinking the resistance is almost broken. The cartel's response was immediate and brutal. Carlos Ramirez ordered his teams to abandon surgical precision for overwhelming force. Professional operators began engaging targets without concern for collateral damage. Technical teams switched from jamming communications to actively sabotaging infrastructure. But this escalation played directly into Helen's strategy. Every aggressive action, every violation of procedure, every example of excessive force was documented and transmitted to federal authorities. The cartel's attempt to multiple federal task forces are mobilizing, Helen's contact reported. El Aguila's operation has crossed too many lines. We've got RICO predicates, terrorism statutes, enough probable cause for a full federal response. M's afternoon update confirmed the shift in momentum. Cartel teams are losing coordination. Their professional operators are starting to act like common thugs, makes them easier to engage, easier to document. Colonel Parker's voice carried quiet pride. My people report similar patterns. They're abandoning sophisticated tactics for brute force, playing right into our hands. Evelyn's network continued providing crucial intelligence as the battle evolved. Cartel units found themselves under constant observation. Their movements reported and countered before they could achieve objectives. Their attempt to control the town exposed them to the reality that the town was already controlling them. Final confirmation, Helen's federal contact reported as evening approached. El Aguila's convoy is committed. Too many resources in motion to recall now. He'll arrive to find a very different situation than he expected. Helen gathered her team for final preparations. The cartel had spent the day executing a perfectly planned military operation, not realizing they were actually participating in an elaborate trap. Every move they made, every escalation they chose, every procedure they abandoned, all of it documented, all of it building the case that would bring the full force of federal law enforcement down on El Aguila's entire organization. They still think this is about controlling territory, Helen told her assembled team, about breaking a town's resistance through superior force. They don't understand that we've already won the real battle. Her phone lit up with final intelligence updates. El Aguila's convoy had passed the point of no return. His entire security detail, his professional operators, his technical teams, all of them committed to an operation that was about to become the biggest law enforcement trap in state history. Tomorrow, Helen concluded, studying the tactical displays, El Aguila will arrive expecting to find a broken town ready for his takeover. Instead, he's going to learn why you should never underestimate a community that's learned to fight back, and why threatening my town was the last mistake his organization will ever make. Dawn broke over Riverstone as El Aguila's convoy approached from the south. 6 armored SUVs moved in perfect formation, flanked by motorcycle escorts, and supported by advanced teams and unmarked vehicles. The cartel leader had brought his entire security apparatus, determined to make a show of force that would be remembered for years. Helen Grant watched through high-powered optics as the convoy passed the town limits. Her tactical display showed everything in motion. Federal units moving into position, state police establishing containment, Colonel Parker's teams ready for their crucial role. Target vehicle confirmed, M reported from her observation post. El Aguila's in the 3rd SUV, full security detail, at least 20 professional operators in support vehicles. Evelyn's network provided continuous updates as the convoy moved through town. Every store owner, every morning coffee regular, every seemingly innocent bystander was part of an intelligence web that tracked the cartel's movement with precision. They're right on schedule, Colonel Parker confirmed through their secure channel. Advanced teams are clearing the route exactly as predicted. They haven't spotted any of our positions. The convoy proceeded down Main Street, where carefully staged scenes of disarray suggested a town already beaten into submission. Broken windows, closed businesses, and empty streets painted a picture of resistance crushed by superior force. Helen's secure line buzzed with confirmation from her federal contact. All units in position, task force standing by, you're clear to execute. El Aguila's convoy reached the town square, where Carlos Ramirez waited with his remaining operators. The cartel leader emerged from his vehicle with the confidence of someone who believed victory was already achieved. His tailored suit and calm demeanor projected absolute authority. Report, he commanded Ramirez, surveying what he thought was a conquered town. Before Ramirez could respond, Helen's plan snapped into action. Hidden barriers emerged from strategically placed construction sites, blocking the convoy's escape routes. M's police units and state tactical teams appeared on rooftops and in doorways, covering every angle with overwhelming force. What is this? El Aguila demanded, his composure cracking as he realized something was wrong. His security team moved to defensive positions, weapons appearing from concealed holsters. Helen's voice carried across the square through pre-positioned speakers. This is what happens when you threaten the wrong town. Colonel Parker's teams activated their part of the operation. Snipers neutralized the cartel's overwatch positions with precise shots. Technical units jammed their communications, cutting off calls for backup. Every escape route and fallback position the cartel had planned found itself already occupied by superior forces. Federal task force moving in, M reported with satisfaction. All approach routes secured, they're completely contained. Evelyn's network continued providing crucial intelligence as the trap closed. Cartel operators attempting to reach hidden weapons caches found them already seized. Emergency extraction routes were blocked by seemingly random civilian activity. Every contingency plan the cartel had prepared found itself systematically neutralized. El Aguila's professional calm shattered as he realized the magnitude of the trap. His entire security detail, his best operators, his sophisticated technical teams, all of them contained in a perfectly orchestrated law enforcement operation. "You don't understand what you've done," he shouted, rage replacing his controlled demeanor. "Do you know who I am? What I can do to this town?" Helen stepped into view, her military bearing unmistakable as she approached the surrounded cartel leader. "We know exactly who you are. We know about your operations in 3 states, your political connections, your distribution networks, everything." Evelyn emerged from her gas station, carrying her notebooks. What had seemed like simple observation had become the foundation of a federal RICO case. Years of careful documentation, patterns of activity, connections between seemingly legitimate businesses, all of it creating an irrefutable chain of evidence. M's voice carried pride as she coordinated with federal tactical teams, all cartel positions neutralized, technical teams captured intact, command and control structure documented and contained. Colonel Parker's operators maintained perfect coverage as federal agents moved in to make arrests. Every attempt at resistance was met with overwhelming force. Every effort to destroy evidence found protective teams already in place. "You played right into it," Helen explained to the stunned cartel leader. "Every move you made, every escalation you chose, every resource you committed, all of it designed to bring you here with your entire organization exposed." El Aguila's expression shifted from rage to dawning comprehension. The sophisticated trap hadn't just been about capturing him. It had been about documenting and exposing his entire operation. Every aggressive action his forces had taken had been recorded, creating an airtight federal case. Federal Task Force reports all objectives secured. Helen's contact confirmed through their secure line. Multiple agencies moving in. This goes way beyond a local cartel operation now. The morning sun climbed higher as federal agents led El Aguila and his command staff away in handcuffs. His professional security teams, the operators who had terrorized the town, found themselves thoroughly documented and contained by superior forces. Evelyn's voice carried quiet satisfaction as she watched from her gas station door. "Guess they learned what happens when you mess with the wrong town." Helen surveyed the scene, watching federal teams process evidence and secure prisoners. The cartel had brought sophisticated weapons, professional operators, and seemingly unlimited resources to crush a small town's resistance. Instead, they had walked into a trap that would dismantle their entire organization. They never understood, she told her assembled team. They thought they were fighting a town that needed to be conquered. They didn't realize they were fighting a community that had learned to defend itself. And that's why they lost before they even arrived. But even as federal agents began their work, Helen's phone lit up with one final warning from her contact. "Be careful. Organizations this big don't go down without a fight. There will be retaliation." The battle for Riverstone had been won, but Helen knew this was just the beginning. The cartel's parent organization would not accept this defeat quietly. They would send worse than El Aguila next time. Bring more than professional operators and sophisticated equipment. "Let them come," Helen said quietly, watching her town return to life around her. "They'll learn the same lesson. You don't threaten a community that's learned to fight back. And you definitely don't threaten my town." Federal agents swarmed Riverstone like ants at a picnic, processing evidence and securing prisoners as the morning progressed. El Aguila's capture had triggered a cascade of law enforcement operations across 3 states, each raid exposing more layers of the cartel's operation. Helen Grant watched from Carter's gas station as another convoy of federal vehicles arrived, their lights reflecting off the windows of shops that were finally reopening. Evelyn served coffee to exhausted officers and agents, her notebooks now the cornerstone of what federal prosecutors were calling the biggest RICO case in state history. Each seemingly innocent observation had become another piece of evidence connecting legitimate businesses to cartel operations. 7 more properties seized this morning, M reported, joining Helen at her usual table. State police found documentation linking them to shell companies in Mexico and Colombia. This goes deeper than even we thought. Colonel Parker's team continued monitoring communications channels, detecting the first ripples of response from the cartel's parent organization, coded messages, urgent communications, sudden movement of assets, all indicating a massive criminal enterprise scrambling to contain the damage. Their burning connections, Colonel Parker noted, spreading surveillance photos across the table. Legitimate businesses cutting ties, political allies distancing themselves. El Aguila's arrest is causing a panic. Helen's secure phone buzzed with updates from her federal contact. Cartel leadership in Mexico is meeting emergency session. They're taking this personally. This wasn't just about losing a distribution network anymore. Evelyn's network had already detected the first signs of retaliation planning, strange vehicles passing through neighboring towns, suspicious property purchases by new shell companies, unfamiliar faces asking questions about Riverstone's defenses. They'll try to make an example of us now, Helen observed, studying patterns in the intelligence reports. El Aguila's capture didn't just disrupt their operations. It showed other towns that resistance is possible. M's afternoon briefing revealed the scope of their victory. Federal teams had seized computers, phones, and documents that exposed corruption at every level. Politicians, judges, law enforcement officials, all compromised, all now under investigation. State Police Task Force is expanding, M reported. They're using our methods in other towns, teaching communities how to resist organized crime. We didn't just beat them here. We created a template, but victory had come with costs. The town bore scars from the conflict, damaged buildings, injured citizens, businesses still recovering from cartel pressure. More concerning were the hints of what was coming next. Multiple private jets landing at regional airports, Colonel Parker reported. European passports, high-end security details, cartels bringing in specialists, professionals who handle problems at this level. Helen's federal contact called with urgent intelligence. Intercepted communications suggest a major response is being planned. They're calling in favors, mobilizing resources. This isn't over. Evelyn's careful documentation continued revealing new layers of the conspiracy. Bank records showed money flowing through seemingly legitimate businesses, connecting local corruption to international criminal enterprises. They had plans for other towns, Evelyn explained, revealing patterns in her notes. Riverstone was supposed to be the model, show other communities what happens when they resist. Helen gathered her core team as evening approached. The immediate victory had been decisive, but the real battle was just beginning. The cartel's parent organization wouldn't accept this defeat quietly. We've hurt them, Helen explained, studying tactical maps showing cartel assets across the region. Not just their operations, but their reputation. They can't let that stand. M's police radio crackled with reports from neighboring jurisdictions. Suspicious activities, unusual property purchases, unfamiliar security teams establishing presence in small towns around Riverstone. They're setting up a perimeter, Colonel Parker observed. Professional operators moving into position. They're planning something big. Evelyn's network continued providing crucial intelligence as tension mounted. Her contacts in other towns reported increased pressure from new business interests, subtle threats against local officials, mysterious accidents befalling resistant community leaders. Helen's phone lit up with encrypted messages from military contacts. Major players moving, old-world crime families taking interest. This isn't just about a cartel anymore. You've attracted attention from organizations that make El Aguila look amateur. The federal task force had begun withdrawing, their immediate mission accomplished, but Helen knew they were leaving Riverstone to face something potentially worse. The focused attention of international criminal enterprises that couldn't allow successful resistance to go unpunished. They think taking down El Aguila was our big play, Helen told her team during their evening briefing. They don't understand that we were just getting started. Colonel Parker's surveillance teams reported increased activity around Riverstone's perimeter. Professional operators conducting reconnaissance, technical teams probing defenses, sophisticated equipment being moved into position. Different level of opposition now, he warned. These aren't cartel soldiers. These are international professionals, specialists who handle problems for organizations that make cartels nervous. But Riverstone had changed during its battle with El Aguila. The town had learned to fight sophisticated enemies, to resist professional pressure, to stand together against overwhelming force. More importantly, they'd created a model that other communities were beginning to follow. Helen's secure line rang one final time that night, a warning from her federal contact. Multiple organizations mobilizing. They're treating Riverstone as a priority target now. This isn't about territory anymore. It's about making sure no other town gets the same ideas. As darkness settled over Riverstone, Helen made preparations for the coming storm. They defeated a cartel that thought it could break a small town through force and intimidation. Now they would face something far more dangerous. International criminal organizations determined to make an example of a community that dared to resist. Let them come, Helen told her assembled team. They think taking down El Aguila was impressive. Wait until they see what happens when they threaten a town that's learned how to fight back. The first sign of the new threat arrived with understated precision. 3 corporate jets landed at regional airports within an hour, their passengers clearing customs with flawless documentation. Helen Grant studied surveillance photos of the new arrivals. European suits, perfect posture, the kind of professionals who made cartel operators look like amateurs. Different level of opposition, Colonel Parker observed, spreading intelligence reports across their command center in Evelyn's basement. These aren't cartel thugs playing soldier. Former intelligence operators, private military contractors, specialists who handle problems for organizations that operate above cartel level. M's morning briefing confirmed the shift in threat assessment. Local businesses reported polite visits from consulting firms offering security upgrades. Town officials received perfectly legitimate proposals for development projects. Every approach was sophisticated, legal, and carried subtle undertones of unstoppable force. They're establishing coverage, Helen explained, marking positions on their tactical map. Professional surveillance, infiltration through legitimate businesses, building information networks. This is how real operators work. Evelyn's network detected the change immediately. Her morning coffee crowd reported mysterious technical issues affecting security systems. Business owners noticed expert inspections of their building's infrastructure. Every movement suggested methodical preparation by experienced professionals. 4 teams confirmed, Colonel Parker reported. European accents, high-end equipment, operating through legitimate corporate fronts. They're mapping everything, power grid, communications, emergency response capabilities. Helen's secure phone buzzed with urgent intelligence from her federal contact. Multiple organizations involved now. Old world crime families, international syndicates. They're treating Riverstone as a priority target. The first demonstration of their capabilities came at noon. The town's primary internet infrastructure experienced a sophisticated cyber attack, while emergency services faced a coordinated series of false alarms. Professional teams used the confusion to probe response protocols and document defensive capabilities. They're testing us, Helen noted, watching the pattern emerge. Professional operators always start with intelligence gathering. They'll build complete profiles before making any direct moves. M's afternoon update revealed more layers of the operation. State police intercepted 2 corporate security teams conducting technical surveys, perfect permits, high-end equipment. They're documenting everything about town infrastructure. Evelyn's careful observation captured subtle changes throughout Riverstone. New businesses opening with suspicious efficacy. In C, property purchases through legitimate but complex corporate structures, professional consultants conducting seemingly innocent surveys. They're establishing a presence, Colonel Parker explained during the emergency briefing, creating legitimate cover for surveillance and operational support. When they move, they'll have complete situational awareness. Helen's military experience recognized the methodology. These weren't cartel soldiers using brute force and intimidation. These were professional operators who understood the value of perfect preparation and plausible deniability. The first casualty came with similar precision. A local contractor who'd helped upgrade town defenses suffered a seemingly natural heart attack. The medical response was perfect, the documentation flawless, but the message was clear. They could reach anyone, anytime, without leaving evidence. "They're sending warnings," M reported, reviewing incident details, showing capabilities without creating actionable evidence. These people understand how to operate above law enforcement level. Evelyn's network continued providing crucial intelligence as the situation evolved. Her contacts reported increased technical surveillance, sophisticated attempts to access secure areas, professional teams conducting detailed reconnaissance of town infrastructure. Helen's federal contact called with updated assessment. Multiple teams identified, former intelligence services, private military contractors, specialists in deniable operations. They're building complete operational coverage. Colonel Parker's team detected increased electronic surveillance. They're mapping our communications, identifying key personnel, documenting response patterns. This is professional pre-operation intelligence gathering. The town's defensive strategy had to evolve rapidly. Helen's military experience had prepared her for cartel violence, but these operators worked at a different level. Every security measure faced sophisticated probing. Every defensive position attracted professional attention. "They're not just gathering intelligence," Helen explained to her assembled team. "They're sending a message, showing that they can reach us anywhere, that our previous defenses won't work against professional operators." M's evening briefing revealed the scope of the challenge. Multiple agencies reporting similar patterns in other resistant towns, professional teams establishing presence, conducting surveys, preparing for coordinated operations. Evelyn's documentation captured the pattern of infiltration. Legitimate businesses serving as cover for surveillance, professional consultants gathering intelligence, sophisticated technical operations, probing town infrastructure. Helen's secure line rang with final confirmation. International coordination confirmed. Multiple organizations cooperating on this operation. They're treating Riverstone as a template case, showing what happens to communities that successfully resist. As night fell, Helen studied the evolving situation. They defeated a cartel that relied on violence and intimidation, but now they faced professional operators who understood the value of perfect preparation and plausible deniability. "They think they're being subtle," she told her team. "Professional, deniable, sophisticated, but they're making the same mistake El Aguila made. They think they're fighting a town that got lucky against a cartel." Colonel Parker's surveillance teams reported increased activity around town perimeter. Multiple professional teams establishing positions, high-end equipment, expert tradecraft. They're preparing for something big. But Riverstone had learned from its victory over the cartel. The town had developed its own networks, its own intelligence gathering, its own methods of resistance. More importantly, they'd created a model that other communities were beginning to follow. "Let them think they have control," Helen instructed, as they prepared for the coming conflict. "Let them believe their professional approach gives them the advantage. They're about to learn what the cartel learned. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is threatening a community that's learned to fight back." The professional team struck at precisely 3 a.m., coordinating their operation with military precision. Town communications went dark as sophisticated jamming equipment activated. Power failed in strategic sectors while technical teams disabled backup systems. Emergency response channels faced perfectly executed electronic warfare measures. Helen Grant watched from her command center as the operation unfolded. Unlike the cartel's brute force approach, these operators moved with surgical precision. Each team had specific objectives. Every action designed to appear as perfectly legitimate technical failures. For teams breaching downtown perimeter, Colonel Parker reported through their backup communications. Professional infiltration techniques, cutting-edge equipment. They're making the cartel look like amateurs. M's voice crackled through their emergency channel. Multiple technical failures affecting critical infrastructure. Perfect coverage of emergency response routes. They're isolating key defensive positions. But Helen had anticipated this level of sophistication. While the professional teams focused on obvious targets, her real countermeasures were already active. Evelyn's network hadn't just been gathering intelligence. They'd been implementing a defensive strategy designed specifically for professional operators. They think they're in control, Helen observed, watching patterns emerge on their tactical displays. Following standard infiltration protocols, establishing dominance over key infrastructure. But they don't realize they're executing exactly the operation we planned for. The first sign of this became apparent when the professional teams encountered unexpected resistance. Their carefully planned routes found sophisticated countermeasures hidden behind seemingly amateur defenses. Every attempt to establish tactical control revealed another layer of prepared response. 3 teams contained in Sector 4, Colonel Parker reported with quiet satisfaction. They're good, but they're following predictable professional protocols, makes them easier to anticipate. Evelyn's network provided crucial real-time intelligence as the operation developed. The professional operators found their sophisticated surveillance countered by ordinary citizens who understood exactly what to look for. Their technical teams faced defensive measures specifically designed to counter expert infiltration. They're getting frustrated, M noted, coordinating response teams, starting to abandon professional protocols, making aggressive moves that expose their positions. Helen's federal contact called with urgent updates. International organizations monitoring the operation are showing concern. This isn't going according to their playbook. The professional team's response revealed their growing frustration. They abandoned subtle approaches for more direct action, exposing their capabilities in ways that perfectly documented their true nature. Every escalation played directly into Helen's strategy. They're making the same mistake as the cartel, she explained to her team. Assuming that superior training and equipment guarantees victory, they don't understand that we've been preparing specifically for this level of opposition. Colonel Parker's teams reported increasing success against the professional operators. They're good, probably the best we've faced, but their professional training makes them predictable. They're following established protocols that we've already countered. Evelyn's careful preparation proved invaluable as the battle evolved. Her network had identified likely infiltration routes, probable surveillance positions, and potential technical vulnerabilities. Every professional team found their expertise matched by defenders who understood exactly how they operated. Multiple teams falling back, M reported with growing confidence. Their sophisticated approach is failing against our prepared defenses. They're starting to realize this isn't a standard operation. Helen's secure line rang with intelligence from federal sources. International organizations are expressing serious concern. Their best operators are being systematically exposed and contained by what they thought was a simple small town. The professional team's operation began to unravel as dawn approached. Their perfect coordination faced disruption from defenders who understood professional tactics. Their sophisticated equipment encountered countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize technical advantages. They're losing control, Colonel Parker observed, tracking enemy movements. These people aren't used to failure. They're starting to make mistakes that expose their entire operation. Evelyn's network continued providing crucial intelligence as the situation developed. Professional operators found themselves under constant observation by citizens who understood their methodologies. Technical teams faced defensive measures that turned their sophisticated approaches against them. Helen's phone lit up with urgent messages from her contacts. Major shift in international response. Organizations are realizing this isn't just about one town anymore. You're exposing capabilities they've relied on for decades. The professional teams made their final mistake as sunrise approached. Frustrated by repeated failures, they attempted a coordinated assault on key infrastructure. The move exposed their entire operation, providing perfect documentation of their true nature and capabilities. Federal Task Force moving in, M reported with satisfaction. We've got everything documented, professional teams, sophisticated equipment, international connections, all of it admissible, all of it traced back to their parent organizations. Colonel Parker's surveillance confirmed their success. Enemy teams are compromised, their professional facades have been broken, their sophisticated covers exposed. This is going to have serious implications for their parent organizations. Helen gathered her team as federal agents began arriving to process evidence and secure captured operators. The international organizations had sent their best professional teams with perfect training and superior equipment. Instead, they'd walked into a trap that exposed capabilities they'd relied on for years. They thought their professional approach made them unstoppable. Helen told her assembled team. They didn't realize that their expertise made them predictable. Their sophisticated methods made them vulnerable to prepared defenses. Her phone buzzed one final time that morning, a message that confirmed the magnitude of their victory. International organizations are pulling back. Your success isn't just about defeating their operators. You've exposed methods they've used for decades. They're treating Riverstone as a serious threat now. The sun rose over a town that had faced and defeated professional operators from international criminal organizations. But Helen knew this wasn't the end. They'd exposed capabilities that powerful organizations relied on, created a model that threatened decades of operational methodology. They'll try again, she warned her team. Send something even more sophisticated, more deniable. But they still won't understand what they're really fighting. A community that's learned to defend itself against any threat, no matter how professional. The morning after defeating the professional teams, Helen Grant sat in Carter's gas station watching multiple news feeds. Reports of similar resistance movements sprouting in small towns across 3 states. Communities implementing Riverstone's defensive strategies. Ordinary citizens learning to recognize and document criminal infiltration attempts. Evelyn's morning coffee crowd had transformed into something unprecedented. Representatives from other towns seeking guidance, learning her methods of gathering and documenting intelligence. Her notebook had become a template for community defense networks spreading across the region. 7 towns have already established similar systems, M reported, spreading maps across their command table. Local law enforcement sharing information, citizens documenting suspicious activities. They're all following our model. Colonel Parker's intelligence painted a picture of panic spreading through international criminal organizations. Their most professional operators had been exposed and defeated. Their sophisticated methodologies were being recognized and countered by ordinary citizens. Multiple emergency meetings confirmed. Helen's federal contact reported through their secure line. Top-level organizations discussing the Riverstone situation. This goes beyond local resistance now. You're threatening operational methods they've relied on for decades. The professional team's defeat had revealed something crucial. Their perfect training, their sophisticated equipment, their expert tradecraft, all of it could be recognized and countered by prepared communities. Riverstone hadn't just beaten them, it had exposed their playbook. They're adapting, Colonel Parker warned, reviewing surveillance data, changing operational patterns, developing new infiltration methods. But the basic problem remains. Once people know what to look for, professional operators become predictable. M's afternoon briefing revealed the spreading impact. State police reported increased requests for training from small town departments. Local officials sought guidance on identifying criminal infiltration. Communities were learning to recognize and resist sophisticated pressure tactics. It's not just about defense anymore, Helen explained to her assembled team. We've created a model that other towns can follow. Every community that successfully resists makes their traditional methods less effective. Evelyn's network had expanded beyond Riverstone's borders. Her careful documentation methods were being taught to other communities. Citizens learned to recognize surveillance patterns, document suspicious activities, and share intelligence through secure channels. For more professional teams identified in the region, Colonel Parker reported. But they're operating differently now, more cautious, less confident. They know their traditional advantages have been compromised. Helen's secure phone buzzed with urgent intelligence. Major players getting directly involved, old-world crime families, international syndicates, they're treating this as an existential threat to their operational methods. The transformation was visible throughout Riverstone. Where the cartel had faced obvious resistance, these professional operators encountered subtle but effective opposition. Every surveillance attempt was detected, every infiltration effort documented, every pressure tactic recognized and countered. They're losing their greatest advantage, M observed during the evening strategy session. Professional operators rely on people not knowing what to look for. Once communities learn their methods, their sophistication becomes a liability. Evelyn's careful observation captured the change in enemy tactics. Professional teams abandoned proven methods for increasingly desperate approaches. Their perfect facades showed cracks as traditional techniques failed against prepared defenders. Helen's federal contact called with crucial updates. International organizations are shifting resources, changing operational patterns. Your success isn't just affecting local operations, it's forcing them to abandon decades-old methodologies. Colonel Parker's team detected increased activity around the region. They're trying to contain the spread of information, prevent other towns from adopting our methods, but it's too late. The knowledge is already out there. The professional operators' defeat had created something the international organizations feared more than any law enforcement action, a replicable model for community resistance. Every town that adopted Riverstone's methods became another crack in their operational foundation. They'll try something dramatic now, Helen warned her team. Something designed to make an example of us, discourage other communities from following our lead. But they still don't understand what they're really fighting. M's police radio crackled with reports from neighboring jurisdictions. Communities sharing intelligence, coordinating responses, implementing defensive strategies that had proven effective in Riverstone. Evelyn's network continued expanding its reach. Her morning coffee groups became training sessions for other towns' observers. Citizens learned to recognize professional operators, document criminal activities, and share intelligence effectively. Helen's phone lit up with messages from military contacts. Multiple organizations mobilizing unprecedented resources. They're treating this as a critical threat to their entire operational model. As night fell over Riverstone, Helen studied reports of spreading resistance. The town had done more than defeat professional operators. It had exposed methods that criminal organizations had relied on for generations. More importantly, it had shown other communities that sophisticated opposition could be recognized and countered. They think making an example of US will solve their problem, she told her assembled team. They don't realize it's too late. We've shown people what to look for, how to resist, why professional operators aren't invincible. Colonel Parker's surveillance teams reported increased activity across the region. They're preparing something big. Multiple organizations coordinating resources, sharing intelligence, planning joint operations. But Riverstone had changed the game. The town hadn't just defeated sophisticated opponents. It had created a template for resistance that threatened decades of criminal methodology. Every community that adopted their methods became another challenge to international organizations' traditional advantages. Let them come, Helen said quietly, watching other towns implement their defensive strategies. They're about to learn that trying to make an example of us will only prove what we've already shown, that communities working together can defeat any threat, no matter how professional. Helen's world shattered with a single phone call. Evelyn Carter's voice trembled on the line. They have Frank, a woman called, says she's from something called the Council. They want everything we've documented, every contact, every network member. We have 1 hour. The Council, a name whispered in intelligence circles, an organization so powerful it controlled multiple criminal enterprises. Helen's military contacts had warned her they might exist, but no one had ever proven it. Frank Carter's abduction changed everything. This wasn't just about Riverstone anymore. The Council had escalated to personal targets, striking at the heart of their resistance. M burst into the command center, her face ashen. Helen, State Police just arrested Chief Williams. He's been working for them the whole time. Every defense plan, every security protocol, they have everything. The betrayal cut deep. Williams had been their strongest ally in law enforcement, coordinating regional response teams, and validating intelligence. His exposure as a Council operative revealed how deeply they'd been compromised. Colonel Parker's urgent report confirmed their worst fears. 3 of our safe houses hit simultaneously. Professional work. They knew exactly where to strike. We've lost contact with 6 team members. Helen's secure phone buzzed. Her federal contact's last message. Council taking direct control. Your federal support is compromised. Trust no one outside your core team. They're coming for. The line went dead. Evelyn's network, their most crucial intelligence asset, began unraveling. Trusted contacts disappeared, or suddenly refused to communicate. Business owners who'd supported their resistance faced mysterious accidents or sudden financial ruin. It's happening across the region. M reported, monitoring police channels. Communities that followed our model are being systematically dismantled. They're not just attacking resistance. They're erasing every trace it existed. The Council's methodology displayed terrifying precision. They didn't just target their enemies. They destroyed support systems, eliminated resources, and turned allies against each other. Every hour brought new revelations of betrayal. Helen gathered her remaining trusted team in the gas station's basement. Evelyn's hands shook as she reported. They're giving people choices. Betray the network or watch their families suffer. Some are breaking, Helen. I can't blame them. Colonel Parker's surveillance confirmed the pattern. They're not just breaking our defense. They're turning the community against itself, making people question whether resistance was ever possible. The Council's message arrived through Williams, now their spokesman. His familiar voice carried new menace. The Council appreciates worthy opponents, Helen. They're offering you a position, your military experience, your strategic mind. They could use someone like you. M's voice cracked as she delivered more devastating news. They found our evidence cache. Everything we documented, every criminal connection we proved, all gone. And the backup server. Someone accessed it from inside our command center. The betrayal struck at their foundation. Someone in their inner circle, someone they trusted implicitly, had been working for the Council all along. Every defense, every contingency, every fallback position had been compromised. Helen faced her hardest decision. The Council's ultimatum was clear. Surrender and join them, or watch everything they'd built be systematically destroyed. Not just their resistance network, but the lives of everyone who'd supported them. Evelyn's quiet voice cut through the silence. Frank told me once, sometimes the hardest part of fighting isn't facing the enemy. It's maintaining your soul when everything you believed in starts to crumble. Colonel Parker reported more defections. Professional teams they'd trusted now worked for the Council. Technical experts who'd supported their defense now turned their skills against former allies. They're not just defeating us, Helen realized, studying reports of communities surrendering across the region. They're making resistance itself seem futile, showing that fighting back only leads to total destruction. M's police radio crackled with increasing reports of former allies accepting Council authority. Towns that had once stood proudly against criminal influence now welcomed council representatives with open arms. The council's strategy displayed masterful understanding of human psychology. They didn't just break resistance, they made surrender seem like the only rational choice. Every community that accepted their authority received immediate benefits. Crime dropped, economy improved, problems disappeared. Helen stood at her tactical board, watching years of work unravel. The council hadn't just outmaneuvered them militarily, they'd attacked the very idea that resistance was possible. Every surrender, every betrayal, every community accepting their authority proved their point. "We have to face reality," Colonel Parker advised grimly. "They're not just winning, they're changing the narrative, making people believe that accepting their control is the best option for everyone." But as Helen studied the pattern of betrayal and surrender, something caught her attention. The council's perfect operation had one flaw: they were too perfect, too confident, too certain of their victory. "They think they've won," she told her remaining loyal team, "but they've made the same mistake every overconfident enemy makes. They think breaking our defense network means breaking our spirit." Evelyn's phone chimed with the 1-hour warning. Frank Carter's life hung in the balance, along with everything they'd built. The council waited for Helen's surrender, certain their perfect strategy had defeated her. "Let them think they've won," Helen said quietly, a new plan forming. "Let them believe their betrayals and ultimatums have broken us, because they're about to learn what the dead Vultures and every other enemy learned too late. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is believing victory is certain." Frank Carter's vintage watch lay on Helen's desk, found abandoned in an empty warehouse with a note, "Time reveals all truths." The council's message was clear, yet something about the staging bothered Helen's tactical mind. Frank had never worn that watch during his captivity. She'd watched him leave it on his nightstand the morning of his abduction. "They're playing theater," Helen announced to her inner circle, now reduced to just Evelyn, and Colonel Parker. "Every move calculated for maximum psychological impact, but they made a mistake. They're trying too hard to convince us of their control." Studied police surveillance footage from the warehouse. The council operative who planted the watch, "Look at his walk pattern." She pointed to the slight hesitation in the man's step. "That's James Chen's signature limp. He was our cybersecurity expert. The traitor in our inner circle." Colonel Parker growled. 3 years of trusted service, designing their security protocols, having access to every level of their operation. But now his theatrical placement of the watch had given them their first real lead. Evelyn spread photographs across the table, James at different security briefings over the years. "Look at his eyes in the later photos, the way he watches Helen instead of the presentations. The council didn't turn him. He was theirs from the beginning." Helen's mind raced through implications. If James had been a council plant from the start, then their assumption of total compromise was wrong. He would have only shared information that made their situation appear hopeless. Maintaining his cover until the perfect moment. Chief Williams wasn't their top asset, Helen realized. He was their distraction. While we focused on the law enforcement breach, we missed the real infiltration. James didn't just have access to our security. He designed our entire communication infrastructure. M's eyes widened. The backup server wasn't destroyed. He redirected our secure channels through his own systems, making us think we'd lost everything while actually collecting every piece of intelligence we gathered. Which means, Colonel Parker leaned forward. Our documentation of the council's operations still exists. James has been building their case for them, thinking he's gathering evidence of our weaknesses. Evelyn's hands trembled as she grasped the implications. Frank's not just a hostage, he's bait. They're using him to keep us focused on an emotional response instead of seeing the bigger picture. Helen moved to her tactical board, seeing the pattern with new clarity. The council's perfect operation. Their seemingly omniscient understanding of the resistance network. Their theatrical displays of power. All of it designed to create an illusion of inevitability. James will have a backup site, Helen stated. Someone that meticulous, that dedicated to his cover. He'll have kept copies of everything, not just our intelligence, but his communications with the council. M was already moving. I know his patterns. 3 years of working together, watching him interact with our systems. He's careful, methodical, follows specific protocols. There are only certain types of locations he'd trust. Colonel Parker pulled up satellite maps of the region. Look for places that match his technical requirements, but also satisfy the council's need for theatrical staging. They're not just gathering intelligence, they're crafting a narrative. Evelyn studied years of notes about James's behavior. Every Friday, he'd take the same route home. Said it was about avoiding traffic, but he always passed that old television broadcast station outside town. Perfect place for someone who thinks he's writing history. Helen's plan crystallized. The council believes they've mastered the art of psychological warfare, turning people's faith against them, but they've forgotten the most important rule of manipulation. Sometimes the most convincing lie reveals the crucial truth. As night fell over Riverstone, Helen's reduced team prepared for their most daring operation. They weren't just fighting to rescue Frank or expose James. They were moving to turn the council's own theatrical staging into their ultimate weakness. They want to write the story of how resistance dies, Helen told her team. Let's show them why you should never give your enemy exactly what they want, especially when they think victory is already certain. The vintage watch still lay on Helen's desk, its hands frozen at the moment of its symbolic delivery. But now it represented something different. Not the council's power, but their fundamental miscalculation. They'd chosen theater over substance, psychological manipulation over true understanding. Tomorrow would change everything, not through force or confrontation, but by revealing the fatal flaw in the council's perfect plan. Sometimes the most devastating counterstrike comes not from fighting your enemy's strength, but from turning their greatest perceived victory into the seed of their destruction. The old broadcast station loomed against the pre-dawn sky, its abandoned tower, a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the clouds. Helen led her team through the overgrown parking lot, following the path that James Chen had traveled every Friday for 3 years. His arrogance in choosing such a symbolically perfect location would be his undoing. M moved ahead, tracking fresh tire marks in the gravel. Multiple vehicles, less than an hour old. They're here, probably watching us right now. She nodded toward surveillance cameras hidden in the deteriorating infrastructure, their new installations betraying their presence among the decay. Good, Helen replied. Let them watch. James won't be able to resist documenting his moment of triumph. People that dedicated to crafting narrative need to record their victories. Colonel Parker's voice whispered through their earpieces. Perimeter teams in position. Council security forces spotted on the upper floors. They're waiting for us to find whatever James prepared. Evelyn's intelligence network, now reduced to absolute core loyalists, reported movement at other council facilities. They're gathering their leadership. James must have promised them something spectacular. The front entrance had been recently accessed, fresh scratches on the old locks revealing frequent use. Inside, the building's abandoned offices showed signs of careful restoration. Network cables snaked along corridors, leading deeper into the structure. Server room would be in the basement, M noted, recognizing James's methodical planning. He'd want stable temperature control, backup power systems, everything necessary to maintain his precious data archive. Helen studied the building's layout, seeing past the theatrical staging. He's not just storing data. This is his testament, proof of his brilliant infiltration, documentation of how he helped the council break an unbreakable resistance. The basement door opened with an ominous creak, revealing a state-of-the-art facility hidden beneath the decaying exterior. Servers hummed in climate-controlled racks, their status lights blinking in steady rhythm. Found you, M whispered, moving to the main console. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, recognizing James's coding style. He's got everything, every operation, every communication, his own personal victory archive. Suddenly, screens lit up around the room. James Chen's face appeared, his usual meticulous expression now twisted with triumphant condescension. "Welcome to the end of your resistance, Helen. I've been waiting 3 years to show you how completely you've been outplayed." But Helen smiled, recognizing the theatrical flourish for what it was, another careful staging, another piece of evidence being recorded for posterity. "You didn't bring us here to show us your victory, James. You brought us here because you couldn't resist documenting it." His expression faltered slightly as Helen moved toward the nearest camera. "All that meticulous record-keeping, all those careful archives, you've documented everything, haven't you? Every council operation, every connection, every piece of evidence we thought we'd lost." "Evidence that will die with you," James replied, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "The council's leadership is watching. They'll see how thoroughly I destroyed your resistance." "No," Helen countered. "They're watching you expose their entire operation, every file, every record, every communication, all of it being transmitted to federal authorities right now." M's fingers danced across the keyboard, executing the real operation. "You're so predictable, James. Same security protocols, same network architecture. I learned your patterns years ago, waiting for this moment." James's face contorted as he realized his mistake. In his devotion to documenting his triumph, he'd created the perfect evidence archive of the council's activities. His theatrical staging had blinded him to the obvious trap. "The council's leadership isn't watching your victory," Helen announced. "They're watching decades of carefully hidden operations being exposed in real time. Every connection, every crime, every piece of evidence you so carefully preserved." Colonel Parker's voice crackled through their comms. "Federal strike teams moving on confirmed council locations. They're using James's own documentation to coordinate raids on the screens." James's expression crumbled as he realized the magnitude of his failure. His perfect archive meant to document the resistance's destruction had become the instrument of the council's exposure. "Frank was never your hostage, was he?" Helen asked, though she already knew the answer. "Another piece of theater meant to distract us from seeing your real vulnerability. Your compulsive need to document everything." Evelyn's voice carried quiet satisfaction through their comms. "Frank's safe. He's been helping us track James's movements for weeks." The watch was the final confirmation of James's involvement. The screens went dark as James attempted to destroy his archives, but it was too late. M had already transmitted everything, using the council's own secure networks to distribute evidence across multiple federal agencies. "They're running," Colonel Parker reported. "Council leadership trying to evacuate safe houses, but federal teams are already in position. James's documentation gave us everything. Locations, protocols, escape routes." Helen watched as years of council operations unraveled, all because their perfect infiltrator couldn't resist creating the perfect record of his masterpiece, their theatrical staging, their psychological warfare, their carefully crafted narrative of inevitable victory, all of it undone by their own agent's compulsive need to document his triumph. Sometimes, Helen told her team as federal agents swarmed the broadcast station, the most effective weapon against theatrical enemies is their own devotion to staging the perfect scene. They were so focused on crafting their story, they forgot to check what story was really being written. Chaos erupted across 3 states as federal strike teams hit council facilities simultaneously. Helen watched from the emergency command center as decades of criminal infrastructure collapsed. Television networks interrupted regular programming with breaking news of coordinated raids targeting some of the region's most prominent business and political figures. 37 council leaders in custody, M reported, monitoring law enforcement channels, their entire command structure exposed. James's documentation gave us everything. Offshore accounts, political bribes, blackmail material, their whole empire is imploding. The council's carefully maintained facade of legitimacy shattered as evidence flooded media channels. Respected community leaders revealed as criminal enforcers. Legitimate businesses exposed as money laundering operations. Politicians caught fleeing with incriminating documents. Colonel Parker's surveillance teams tracked desperate evacuation attempts. They're turning on each other, council members trying to cut deals, offering evidence against former allies. Their whole hierarchy is eating itself alive. But amid the chaos, Helen detected a disturbing pattern. Some of them aren't running. The oldest council members, the ones with the deepest connections, they're too calm. This isn't over. Evelyn's restored network confirmed Helen's suspicions. Reports of document destruction at key facilities, mysterious flights leaving private airfields, assets being liquidated through emergency protocols. They're activating contingency plans, Helen realized. The council's been operating for generations. They wouldn't survive this long without emergency measures for exactly this situation. M's analysis of James's files revealed the truth. There's a second layer. The council we exposed was just the visible operation. Behind them, there's something older, more deeply rooted. The evidence pointed to a shadow structure, an inner circle that had operated since before the council's formation. While federal agencies celebrated the apparent victory, this hidden core was already preparing its response. They're letting their public face fall, Colonel Parker observed. Sacrificing the exposed organization to protect something bigger, classic misdirection. Helen studied decades of council operations, seeing the pattern emerge. Every major law enforcement victory against them had followed this same template, apparent collapse, hiding strategic withdrawal. The council isn't just an organization, Helen told her team. It's a system designed to survive by sacrificing its visible elements to protect its core. What we're seeing isn't their destruction, it's their evolution. Evelyn's intelligence network detected the first signs of this transformation. New businesses incorporating in neighboring states, unfamiliar operators establishing presence in strategic locations, a deeper, more sophisticated network emerging from the council's apparent ruins. They're not trying to maintain control anymore, M realized, tracking the pattern. They're dispersing, becoming harder to identify, harder to target, trading power for survival. Helen recognized the strategy from her military experience. They're shifting to a cellular structure, smaller units, independent operations, minimal connections, making themselves resistant to the kind of exposure that just worked against them. The celebration of Council's defeat continued across the region, but Helen's team understood the deeper truth. They hadn't destroyed the organization, they'd forced it to adapt, to become something potentially more dangerous. Visible victory, hidden threat, Colonel Parker summarized. While everyone focuses on dismantling the exposed structure, the real power is transforming itself. Helen gathered her core team for the real challenge ahead. The council's public face was falling, but its heart was already preparing a more insidious response. Their victory had changed the game, but the game wasn't over. They think their contingency plans will save them, Helen told her assembled commanders. That becoming invisible will make them invincible, but they've forgotten the most important lesson of our resistance. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is believing your own deception. As federal agents continued their raids, Helen prepared for the true final battle. The council's exposed leadership would fall, their visible empire would crumble, but the real fight was just beginning. They're counting on us celebrating apparent victory, she explained. While we dismantle their public organization, they'll rebuild something worse in the shadows, unless we're ready for them. The next phase would require something more sophisticated than raids and arrests. While law enforcement focused on the council's visible elements, Helen's team would hunt something far more elusive, the hidden core that had survived generations of exposure and attack. Let them think their contingency plans are working, Helen instructed. Let them believe their transformation will save them, because they're about to learn why you should never assume your enemy's victory is the end of the story. 3 days after the council's apparent collapse, Helen Grant sat in Carter's gas station, drinking coffee and waiting. Evelyn worked the counter as usual, serving her morning regulars. Nothing in their behavior suggested they were executing the final phase of the most sophisticated trap ever set for a criminal organization. Target confirmed, M's voice whispered through Helen's concealed earpiece. 7 individuals entering the old meeting house, matches facial recognition for suspected inner circle members. The council's hidden core had emerged exactly as Helen predicted. While law enforcement dismantled their public organization, the true leaders gathered to implement their transformation protocols. Protocols Helen had allowed them to discover in James's files. Perimeter secure, Colonel Parker reported. They're following the contingency plans perfectly. Think they're being clever, using their own civilian identities instead of proxies. Helen sipped her coffee, remembering that first confrontation with the dead Vultures so many months ago. From that simple act of resistance, they'd uncovered and dismantled layers of criminal enterprise, finally reaching the hidden puppet masters themselves. They're all inside, Evelyn confirmed through their secure channel. Her network had spent weeks feeding the inner circle carefully crafted intelligence, making them believe this location was truly secure. The council's core leadership, judges, business leaders, politicians with generational influence thought they were safely hidden behind their respectable facades. They'd sacrificed their visible criminal empire to protect something more valuable, their true identities and social power. Helen gave the signal. Execute final phase. The operation unfolded with devastating precision, not through raids or confrontation, but through the careful exposure of decades of hidden evidence. Every meeting recorded, every connection documented, every crime linked directly to the respected community leaders who'd orchestrated them. Files uploading to all major media outlets, M reported. Financial records, video evidence, witness statements, everything connecting their legitimate identities to decades of criminal enterprise. The council's inner circle realized too late that their contingency plans hadn't been secret at all. Their careful protocols, designed to protect their true identities, had instead guided them perfectly into documented criminal conspiracy. Federal teams moving in, Colonel Parker confirmed, but they won't resist. These aren't cartel soldiers or professional criminals. These are people whose power depends entirely on their public reputations. Helen watched through hidden cameras as the truth dawned on the council's core leadership. They hadn't just lost their criminal empire. They'd lost the respectability that made their true power possible. Their own emergency protocols had trapped them more effectively than any raid. It's over, M announced, monitoring multiple channels, their entire shadow structure exposed, every hidden connection, every secret account, every concealed operation, all of it traced directly to their legitimate identities. Evelyn's network had already begun distributing evidence to every community affected by council operations. Not just proof of crimes, but documentation of how respected leaders had manipulated and exploited their own neighbors for generations. They never understood what they were really fighting, Helen told her team, as federal agents led the council's true leadership away. They thought power came from controlling communities through fear and corruption. They never realized that real strength comes from communities standing together. The aftermath transformed more than just Riverstone. Communities across the region learned that resistance wasn't just possible. It was most effective when people worked together, shared intelligence, and refused to be intimidated by any threat. M's law enforcement network became a model for other departments, teaching them to recognize and counter criminal infiltration. Evelyn's intelligence-gathering methods were adopted by communities nationwide, creating networks of informed citizens working to protect their towns. Colonel Parker's team transitioned into training other communities, showing them how to organize effective resistance against criminal pressure. The lessons learned in Riverstone's struggle spread, making it increasingly difficult for criminal organizations to establish control anywhere. Helen stood in a gas station doorway, watching her town embrace its hard-won freedom. From that first confrontation with dead Vultures bikers, through battles with cartels and professional operators, to the final exposure of the Council's hidden core, Riverstone had become something unprecedented, proof that determined communities could defeat any enemy, no matter how powerful. You know what they never figured out? Evelyn asked, joining Helen at the door. Why they couldn't break us, even with all their power and resources. Helen smiled, remembering every step of their journey. Because they thought they were fighting a town, they never understood they were fighting a community that had learned its own strength. The sun set over Riverstone, now a symbol of successful resistance that would inspire others for generations. Helen's final victory hadn't come through military strategy or force of arms, but through showing people that the most powerful weapon against corruption and intimidation was a community's united determination to stand together. They thought threatening a small town was safe, Helen said quietly, watching families walk without fear through their restored community. Instead, they learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is believing that power and fear are stronger than people standing together for what's right. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.